I bought a used laptop and found a folder named after my childhood nickname. The folder name stopped me cold. Sparrow_archive sat there on the desktop of a 5-year-old Dell I'd bought off Craigslist for $300, and my hands went numb on the keyboard. Nobody had called me Sparrow since I was 8 years old. Nobody except my Uncle David, who died when I was 13, and the handful of family members who remembered his weird habit of giving all us kids bird names. I sat there in my apartment at 1 a.m, staring at that folder like it might explode, because there was absolutely no reason my childhood nickname should be on a stranger's laptop. I'd picked up the machine that afternoon from a guy named Austin Pembroke, who lived in a decent neighborhood about 20 minutes from my place. Clean-cut guy, mid-30s, said he was upgrading to a newer model for work. The laptop was in good shape, factory reset confirmed, or so I thought. I'd booted it up, planned to do a fresh Windows install, and there it was. One folder, just sitting there. Pembroke had seemed normal. We'd made small talk about the weather, he'd shown me the charger still worked, I'd handed him cash, done deal. Now I was wondering what the hell I'd actually bought. My finger hovered over the trackpad. The rational part of my brain said this had to be a coincidence. Sparrow wasn't that unique. Maybe Pembroke had a kid with the same nickname. Maybe it was a gaming handle. Maybe I was tired and seeing connections that didn't exist. But my gut, the part that had kept me alive through a rough childhood and a rougher adolescence, was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I clicked the folder open. Inside were 6 subfolders, each labeled with dates spanning from 2008 to 2019. The oldest folder was from when I was 7 years old. The newest was from 2 years ago when I was 24. I opened the 2008 folder first. My hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that made the cursor jump around the screen. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Pictures of a small, brown-haired boy playing in a park. The boy was me. I recognized the blue jacket I'd worn until the zipper broke, the ratty sneakers my mom had bought from a thrift store, the way I used to squint when I smiled because I needed glasses but we couldn't afford them. These were pictures I'd never seen before, angles that suggested they'd been taken from a distance, from behind trees or across playgrounds. Surveillance photos of me when I was 7 years old. The room felt too small suddenly. I pushed back from my desk, chair scraping loud in the quiet apartment, and walked to the kitchen to get water. My reflection in the dark window looked pale, eyes too wide. I drank straight from the tap, cold water splashing my shirt, and tried to think. This didn't make sense. Why would someone have old surveillance photos of me? I wasn't anyone special. I'd grown up poor in the suburbs of Minneapolis, raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs, barely graduated high school, and now worked IT support for a medical supply company. I wasn't rich. I wasn't connected. I was nobody. But someone had thought I was worth watching. Someone had taken hundreds of photos of me as a child and stored them in a folder labeled with a nickname only my family used. I went back to the laptop. The 2010 folder had more photos, plus video files. I clicked on one. The footage was grainy, clearly shot on an older camera, and showed me at maybe 9 years old walking home from school. The camera followed me for 3 blocks before the video cut out. Another file showed me sitting on my front steps reading a book. I watched myself for 5 minutes, just sitting there, completely unaware I was being filmed. The timestamp said it was a Wednesday in October. I remembered that book. It was about dragons. I opened the 2015 folder with a growing sense of dread that sat in my stomach like a stone. This folder had documents, PDFs of what looked like medical records, though the names were redacted, school transcripts with my grades and teacher comments, a scanned copy of my mom's lease agreement from our old apartment, a detailed log of my daily routines, what time I left for school, what route I took, where I hung out after classes, what friends I saw. The log covered 6 months and was typed in neat clinical language. Subject departed residence at 7:42 a.m., proceeded north on Fulton Avenue, stopped at corner store, purchased energy drink and chips, arrived at school at 8:15 a.m. Subject. They'd called me Subject. I clicked through more files, my breathing getting shallow. There were photos of my mom too, and my grandmother. Pictures of our old cars, our house, my mom's workplace. Someone had documented our entire lives like we were specimens in a lab. The most recent folder, from 2019, contained newer photos and something that made my blood run cold. A spreadsheet tracking my employment history, my current address, my vehicle registration, even my damn Netflix login. Someone had been watching me for 17 years. Someone was maybe still watching me. I slammed the laptop shut and stood up so fast I knocked over my water glass. It shattered on the floor, but I barely heard it. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of this, trying to figure out who and why and what I was supposed to do. Call the police? And tell them what? I bought a laptop with creepy files about myself? They'd think I was crazy. But this wasn't nothing. This was evidence of stalking spanning nearly 2 decades. This was someone who knew where I lived right now, today. This was someone who'd sold me their surveillance equipment like it was no big deal. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the texts from Pembroke. We'd arranged the sale through Facebook Marketplace, and I'd been stupid enough to meet him alone. I scrolled through our conversation, looking for any detail I might have missed. He'd been friendly, professional, not pushy. Said he was selling because of a work upgrade. Gave me his address without hesitation. I looked at his Facebook profile again. Minimal information. Profile picture was a landscape photo, only about 30 friends. The account had been created 8 months ago. Everything about it screamed fake. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You weren't supposed to find those files. We need to talk. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. They knew. Whoever this was, they knew I'd opened the folders. Was there tracking software on the laptop? Had it sent an alert when I accessed those files? I looked around my apartment wildly, suddenly convinced there were cameras, that I was being watched right now. The curtains were open. I crossed the room and yanked them shut, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Another text came through. Don't involve the police. This is complicated. Meet me tomorrow, noon, at Riverside Park. Come alone. I stared at the message. Every instinct said this was a trap, that meeting this person was the stupidest thing I could possibly do. But I also needed answers. I needed to know why someone had been documenting my life since I was 7 years old. I needed to know if I was in danger, if my mom was in danger. The not knowing felt worse than any risk of meeting them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with the lights on, the laptop on the coffee table in front of me, going through every folder again and again. I found more documents in the later years. Copies of emails I'd sent to friends, screenshots of my social media posts, bank statements showing my pathetic savings account balance. Whoever had compiled this knew everything about me. They knew I was allergic to penicillin. They knew I'd failed my driver's test twice. They knew about the girl I'd dated junior year and how badly it ended. They had my entire life in a folder labeled with a dead man's nickname for me. Around 6 in the morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to that meeting alone, and I wasn't going unprepared. I called my best friend Liam, who'd been my roommate in college, and was now a paralegal at a downtown law firm. He answered on the 5th ring, voice thick with sleep. Dude, it's 6 a.m. on a Sunday. Someone better be dead. I almost laughed. Not yet, but I need your help with something insane. Can you come over? And bring your camera, the good one you use for depositions. There was a pause. You're freaking me out. What's going on? I looked at the laptop. I'll explain when you get here. Just trust me. And Liam, don't tell anyone you're coming here. He arrived 40 minutes later with a backpack full of equipment and the expression of deep concern. I showed him everything. We went through the folders together, and I watched his face go from skeptical to horrified to professionally focused. Liam had always been the steady one, the guy who stayed calm in a crisis, and I needed that now. He photographed every screen, every document, every image with his high-resolution camera, creating a backup of the backup. We're documenting chain of custody, he explained as he worked. If this goes to court, we need to prove these files existed on this device, purchased from this specific person, on this specific date. You think this will go to court? I asked. Liam looked at me seriously. This is evidence of long-term stalking, possible identity theft, definite privacy violations. Yeah, this is going to court. But first we need to figure out who Austin Pembroke really is and why he has 17 years of surveillance data on you. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling my boss. She's a former prosecutor, handles civil rights cases now. She'll know what to do. I grabbed his wrist. The text said not to involve anyone. Liam shook me off. The text came from a stalker who's been documenting your life since you were a child. We're way past following their instructions. His boss, attorney Rebecca Ortega, met us at her office downtown at 9 that morning. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to our story without interrupting, made notes in a leather portfolio, and asked pointed questions that cut through my panic to the facts. She examined the photos Liam had taken, read through the documentation, and finally leaned back in her chair. This is one of the most comprehensive stalking cases I've seen, she said bluntly. Whoever compiled this invested significant time and resources. The question is why? Do you have any idea what makes you a target? I shook my head. I'm nobody. I'm not rich. I'm not connected. I don't have access to anything valuable. Rebecca tapped her pen against her desk. Everyone is someone to somebody. Family connections? Business relationships? Inherited property? Anything unusual in your background? I thought about my childhood. My Uncle David died when I was 13. He left me some money for college in a trust. But it was only about $15,000. I used most of it already. Rebecca's eyes sharpened. How did he die? The question surprised me. Car accident. Why? She wrote something down. Maybe nothing, but the surveillance starts around the time you would have been named in that trust. Could be relevant. She made calls. Within 2 hours, we had 3 people in her conference room. Rebecca, Detective James Kowalski from the Minneapolis PD's Cybercrimes Unit, a private investigator named Diana Frost who specialized in digital forensics, and us. Detective Kowalski was a patient man with 23 years on the force who treated my story with more seriousness than I'd expected. Stalking cases are hard to prove, he admitted, but you've got documentation. That's good. That's real evidence. Now we need to figure out who's behind it and why they let you find it. Diana, the forensic investigator, took possession of the laptop using proper evidence handling procedures, photographing it, documenting the serial number, creating a full disk image before touching anything. She was meticulous, explaining each step. This laptop might have metadata that tells us who created these files, when, and on what device originally. There might be internet history, email accounts, cloud storage connections. We'll find digital fingerprints. She looked at me. But I need you to understand this will take time. Days, maybe weeks. And whatever we find, it might not be pleasant. Are you prepared for that? I thought about 17 years of surveillance. About someone knowing my daily routines, my passwords, my fears. I need to know, I said. Whatever it is, I need to know. Detective Kowalski nodded approvingly. Good. Now about this meeting request. You're not going alone, and you're not going unarmed with information. We'll wire you, have plainclothes officers in the area, and I'll be close enough to intervene if things go sideways. But here's the key. We need them to talk. We need them to admit what they've done, explain why they've done it. Can you do that? Can you stay calm and keep them talking? The idea terrified me, but I agreed. What choice did I have? We spent the next 2 hours planning. Rebecca coached me on questions to ask, on how to keep someone talking without seeming interrogative. Liam insisted on being one of the undercover observers. Detective Kowalski explained the wire setup, showed me the tiny microphone that would clip to my shirt, promised me they wouldn't let anything happen. But I could see it in his eyes. They couldn't actually guarantee my safety. If whoever was behind this wanted to hurt me, there would be a window of time before anyone could stop them. Riverside Park at noon was unusually crowded for late September. Families with kids, joggers, people walking dogs. I sat on the designated bench near the fountain, the wire pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat, and waited. My phone buzzed at exactly noon. Look behind you. I turned. A woman stood about 20 feet away, middle-aged, blonde hair, business casual clothing, looking completely unremarkable. She could have been anyone's mom, anyone's co-worker. She gestured for me to walk with her, away from the bench. Every muscle in my body tensed. That wasn't the plan. Detective Kowalski's voice crackled in my nearly invisible earpiece. It's okay. We've got visual. Stay with her. I caught up to the woman, and we walked slowly along the park path. She didn't look at me directly. My name is Catherine Brennan, she said quietly, and I owe you an explanation that's 17 years overdue. I forced my voice to stay steady. You're the one who's been watching me. She nodded. Among other things. I'm a private investigator, contracted in 2008 to conduct long-term surveillance on you and your family. My client wanted comprehensive documentation of your development, your relationships, your choices. I was paid very well to be thorough. Who hired you? My hands clenched into fists. Why would anyone want to watch a 7-year-old kid? Catherine sighed. Your Uncle David. He hired me 6 months before he died. The world tilted. I stopped walking. That's impossible. Uncle David loved me. He wouldn't... Catherine turned to face me finally. He didn't hire me to hurt you. He hired me to protect you. Or rather, to document that you were being properly cared for after he was gone. He suspected his death wasn't going to be an accident. The words didn't make sense. My uncle died in a car crash. Single vehicle accident, lost control on a wet road, no other cars involved. The police report said mechanical failure, bad brakes. I'd read it years later when I was old enough to request the file. What are you talking about? Catherine reached into her bag slowly, keeping her movements visible, and pulled out a folder. Not a digital file, an actual physical folder, worn with age. This is everything David gave me before he died. Letters, documentation, his suspicions. He believed someone in your family was going to kill him for his estate, and he wanted to make sure you were protected after he was gone. I took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were letters in my uncle's handwriting, addressed to me. To be opened when you're old enough to understand, the top one said. I looked at Catherine. If you were protecting me, why the surveillance? Why the invasion of privacy? She met my eyes. Because David's instructions were specific. Document everything. If you were being abused, neglected, or if anything happened to you, I was to turn all evidence over to the authorities. If you grew up safe and healthy, I was to maintain the documentation until you turned 25, then deliver everything to you along with his letters and a final inheritance he'd hidden. 25, I repeated. I turned 25 3 months ago. Catherine nodded. I was preparing to contact you properly, through official channels, with everything packaged appropriately. And then I made a mistake. I was upgrading my equipment, selling off old hardware, and I forgot to wipe one drive completely. The laptop you bought had a backup partition I didn't catch. I realized my error when my software alerted me that someone had accessed those files. I panicked. I needed to know if you'd found them, needed to explain before you went to the police thinking you had a stalker with malicious intent. Detective Kowalski's voice in my ear. Keep her talking. Ask about the uncle's death. I forced myself to focus. You said Uncle David suspected he'd be killed. Do you have proof? Catherine's expression darkened. David was a forensic accountant. He'd discovered financial irregularities in a family trust, money that was supposed to be distributed to multiple heirs, but was being siphoned off by the executor. He confronted them about it and died 2 weeks later. The brake line failure was clean, professional. I've always suspected it wasn't an accident, but I could never prove it. That's why I kept watching, to make sure whoever killed David didn't come after you too. The family trust. I'd heard about it vaguely growing up, some complicated inheritance from my grandmother's side that was supposed to benefit all her grandchildren. But it had been tied up in legal issues for years, managed by a family member I barely knew. Who was the executor? I asked. Catherine hesitated. Your mother's brother, your Uncle Richard. The name hit me like a physical blow. Uncle Richard, who'd always been friendly at family gatherings, who'd helped my mom with rent a few times when things were tight, who'd sent me a card for my high school graduation. No, I said automatically. He wouldn't. He's family. David thought so too, initially, Catherine said. That's why he documented everything so carefully before confronting Richard. Here. She pulled out another document from her bag, this one an official-looking financial statement. This is an analysis David completed 2 weeks before his death. It shows systematic withdrawal patterns from the trust over 5 years, totaling close to $800,000. Money that should have been distributed to you, your cousins, and several other beneficiaries. Richard was stealing from his own family. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing. $800,000. If that had been distributed properly, my share would have been significant. Maybe enough that my mom wouldn't have had to work 2 jobs. Maybe enough that I could have gone to a better college. Maybe enough to change our entire lives. Why didn't this come out when Uncle David died? Why didn't the police investigate? Catherine's face was grim. Because Richard is connected. He's a city councilman now, has been for 6 years. He has relationships with the police department, with prosecutors, with judges. When David died, the investigation was cursory. Mechanical failure, case closed. No one wanted to dig deeper. Detective Kowalski's voice. We need her to implicate Richard directly. Ask if she has evidence he killed David. I swallowed hard. Do you have proof that Richard sabotaged Uncle David's car? Catherine shook her head. No direct proof, but I have circumstantial evidence. Security footage from a garage showing Richard's car parked near David's the night before the accident. Phone records showing multiple calls between Richard and a mechanic who was later convicted of insurance fraud. Enough to raise questions, but not enough for charges. Not 17 years ago, anyway. What about now? I asked. With everything you've documented, with David's financial analysis, could we build a case? Catherine looked at me carefully. That depends. Are you willing to go up against a city councilman with political connections and money? Are you willing to have every aspect of your life examined in court? Because Richard won't go quietly. He'll destroy your credibility, claim David was paranoid, claim I'm a conspiracy theorist, claim you're just after money. It will be ugly. I thought about 17 years of being watched, of my privacy violated for my own protection, of a truth buried so deep it had become invisible. I thought about my Uncle David, who'd apparently known he was going to die and had spent his final weeks trying to protect me. I need to read his letters, I said. I need to understand what he wanted me to do. Catherine nodded and gestured to a bench. We sat, and I opened the first letter with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Dear Sparrow, it began, and my eyes immediately blurred with tears. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're old enough to know the truth. I've always called you Sparrow because you reminded me of those brave little birds. Small, overlooked, but resilient and clever. I'm writing to tell you that your family isn't what it seems. There are people who care more about money than about the children they're supposed to protect. I've found proof of theft, and I'm going to confront the person responsible. If anything happens to me after that, I want you to know it wasn't an accident. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing what David had discovered, naming Richard explicitly, explaining the trust structure and how Richard had manipulated it. The second letter was more personal, memories of our time together, his hopes for my future, his regret that he wouldn't be there to see me grow up. The third letter was instructions. When you're old enough, get the evidence from Catherine Brennan. She has everything. Take it to someone who can't be bought. Make sure the truth comes out. Don't let Richard win. I sat there in the park, reading my dead uncle's words, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about money or privacy anymore. This was about justice for a man who'd tried to protect me and had died for it. I looked at Catherine. I want to take this to the police. All of it. The financial evidence, David's letters, everything you've documented. I want Richard charged with theft at minimum, and I want David's death investigated properly. Catherine studied my face. You're sure? Once we start this, there's no going back. Detective Kowalski's voice. Tell her you're already working with the police. We're ready to move on this. I pulled out my earpiece and showed it to Catherine. Her eyes widened. You're wired. I nodded. Detective James Kowalski, Cybercrimes Unit, has been listening to everything. He's here with a team. And yes, I'm sure. Let's do this properly. Catherine's expression cycled through surprise, resignation, and something that might have been relief. All right then, I'll cooperate fully. I've been carrying this for 17 years. It's time to put it down. The next 3 hours were a blur of formal statements, evidence transfer, and strategic planning. We relocated to the police station, where Catherine turned over her complete files, physical and digital. Detective Kowalski brought in the district attorney's office, specifically Assistant DA Michael Reeves, who specialized in financial crimes and public corruption. Reeves was a sharp, methodical man who listened to our story, examined the evidence, and asked the kind of questions that made me realize this was real. We were really doing this. We were going after a city councilman. "The financial evidence is solid," Reeves said after 2 hours of review. "David's analysis shows clear patterns of embezzlement. We can prove Richard systematically stole from the trust. That's multiple felony counts right there. The question is whether we can prove he killed David to cover it up. That's going to be harder." Diana Frost, the forensic investigator, had been working on the laptop in a separate room. She came in with a triumphant expression. "I found something." The laptop had remnants of email correspondence between Catherine and another investigator, someone Richard hired to watch David in the weeks before his death. She pulled up the emails on a screen. They were brief, professional, and damning. Richard's hired investigator had documented David's movements, noted when he met with Catherine, when he visited his attorney, when he accessed financial records. The final email, sent 3 days before David's death, said simply, "Target has compiled comprehensive evidence and plans to file formal complaint Monday. Recommend immediate action." Reeves read it twice. "This is conspiracy. This is premeditation. If we can connect Richard to this investigator and prove they acted on this recommendation, we have him for murder." The investigator's name in the emails was Thomas Whitfield. Detective Kowalski ran it immediately. Whitfield had died 8 years ago, apparent suicide, no note. "Convenient," Kowalski said darkly. "Very convenient." But Whitfield had family, and Diana tracked down his daughter, Allison Whitfield Chen, who lived in Chicago. Kowalski called her. 20 minutes later, we knew she'd found her father's old files in storage after he died and had always suspected his suicide wasn't real. She'd kept everything, including backup copies of all his investigative work, because she'd hoped someday someone would want to know the truth about what he'd been involved in. Things moved fast after that. Allison agreed to overnight her father's files. We spent the night at the police station, going through Catherine's documentation in detail, building a timeline, identifying every piece of evidence that connected Richard to the embezzlement and David's death. Rebecca Ortega worked her network, quietly reaching out to other families who'd been affected by the trust mismanagement, finding more victims who'd suspected something was wrong, but had never had proof. By morning, we had statements from 6 people whose inheritance had been stolen, all pointing to Richard. The hardest part was telling my mom. I called her at 6 in the morning, asked her to come to Rebecca's office, told her I needed to talk about something important regarding Uncle David. She arrived worried, thinking something was wrong with me. When I explained what we'd found, what we suspected, what we were planning to do, she went completely still. "Richard," she said finally. "My brother Richard killed David?" Her voice was hollow. I showed her David's letters, the financial evidence, everything. She read it all in silence, tears streaming down her face. "I knew something was wrong with David's death," she said quietly. "It never made sense. He was so careful with his car, so safety conscious. But Richard was there for us after. He helped with funeral costs. He checked on us. He seemed devastated." She looked at me with red eyes. "He was helping us with money he'd stolen from us. He killed his own brother-in-law and then played the supportive family member." The rage in her voice was ice cold. "I want him prosecuted. I want everyone to know what he did." On Monday morning, Detective Kowalski and Assistant DA Reeves brought Richard in for questioning. They didn't arrest him. Not yet. They wanted him to talk, to dig himself deeper. I watched from an observation room as they presented him with the evidence. His reaction was telling. First confusion, then dismissal, then anger. "This is ridiculous. David died in an accident 17 years ago. You're basing this on what, conspiracy theories from a paranoid private investigator?" But when they showed him Whitfield's emails, his face went pale. "I don't know what those are. I never hired anyone to watch David." "Then explain how your personal credit card was used to pay Thomas Whitfield's retainer," Reeves said, sliding a bank statement across the table. "Explain the 6 phone calls between your cell and Whitfield's cell in the week before David died. Explain why Whitfield documented David's every move and recommended immediate action 3 days before David's brake line mysteriously failed." Richard's lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Gregory Walsh, put his hand on Richard's arm. "My client won't be answering any more questions without reviewing this evidence in detail." But Richard couldn't stop himself. David was going to ruin me over a misunderstanding. He didn't understand how the trust worked, how expenses were allocated. I was the executor. I had discretion. Walsh cut him off. "Richard, stop talking." But it was too late. He'd admitted knowing about David's investigation, admitted there was conflict between them, admitted he'd viewed David as a threat. The detectives let him leave, and I watched him walk out of the station, knowing it was probably the last time he'd walk free for a long while. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Allison Whitfield's father's files arrived, and they were comprehensive. Thomas Whitfield had kept detailed records of everything Richard had asked him to do, including notes about the brake line sabotage. Whitfield had been a mechanic before becoming an investigator. He knew how to make an accident look natural. His notes suggested he'd been consumed with guilt afterward, that Richard had threatened him to keep him quiet, that the suicide might have actually been Whitfield trying to confess by leaving evidence behind. With Whitfield's files, the DA's office had enough for charges. They arrested Richard at his city council office on a Wednesday afternoon. The media coverage was immediate and brutal. City councilman charged in 17-year-old murder made every news outlet. The embezzlement charges came the same day: 8 counts of theft, multiple counts of fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty. Rebecca Ortega filed a civil lawsuit on behalf of all the trust beneficiaries. The total amount stolen was actually over $900,000, once Diana's forensic accountants traced all the transfers. Richard's fall was spectacular. He resigned from the city council within 24 hours. His wife filed for divorce within 48. Former allies and supporters distanced themselves immediately. Nobody wants to be associated with someone who killed a family member over money. The trial was set for 6 months out, but the evidence was so overwhelming that his new defense attorney, the third one he'd hired after the first 2 quit, recommended a plea deal. He was looking at life in prison for the murder charge alone. The media found me, of course. They wanted the story of the nephew who'd discovered the truth, who'd bought a laptop that accidentally contained the evidence to solve a cold case murder. I gave one interview to a local investigative journalist named Patricia Valdez, who promised to handle it with sensitivity. The story ran under the headline, "A childhood nickname and a used laptop brought down a killer." It was read 3 million times in the first week. The YouTube videos created from the audio interview got even more views. I spent a lot of time reading and rereading Uncle David's letters. In them, he talked about teaching me chess, about the time we went fishing and I fell in the lake, about how proud he was of the person I was becoming. He talked about how he hoped I'd grow up to be brave and honest, how he hoped I'd never have to know about any of this ugliness. But if I did have to know, he hoped I'd do the right thing. I thought about that a lot. The right thing. It hadn't felt right, exposing family secrets, destroying my Uncle Richard's life, putting my mom through the pain of learning her brother was a murderer. But it was justice. And David deserved justice. Catherine Brennan became an unexpected ally through all of this. She testified at the preliminary hearings, provided context for all the evidence, explained her 17 years of surveillance. She apologized to me, privately, for the invasion of privacy. "I was following David's instructions," she said. "But that doesn't make it okay that I watched you without your knowledge for most of your life. I'm sorry." I accepted her apology. She'd been trying to protect me, in her way, and if she hadn't made that mistake with the laptop, Richard might have gotten away with murder forever. The plea deal came through in March. Richard pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, embezzlement, and fraud. The prosecution agreed to recommend concurrent sentences, which meant he'd serve 35 years minimum before being eligible for parole. He'd be 83 years old. The judge accepted the plea and, in an unusual move, made a statement about how the pursuit of money had corrupted someone who should have been protecting his family. Richard showed no emotion during sentencing. He looked at me once, across the courtroom, and I couldn't read his expression. Regret? Anger? Nothing at all? The civil lawsuit settled out of court. Richard's assets were liquidated, and the trust beneficiaries finally received what they were owed, plus interest and penalties. My share came to just over $200,000. It felt wrong to profit from this, from David's death, from 17 years of surveillance and lies. But my mom reminded me that David had wanted this for me. He'd wanted me to have the opportunities the money would provide. So I used some of it to pay off my mom's debts, some to go back to school for a computer science degree, and some I donated to organizations that helped families affected by financial crime. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, I visited David's grave for the first time in years. I brought flowers and the letters he'd written me. I sat there in the quiet cemetery and told him about everything that had happened, about how his planning and foresight had finally brought the truth to light, about how his killer was in prison, about how he'd saved me one more time, even from beyond the grave. I told him I wished I'd known him better as an adult, wished we'd had more time. I told him I understood why he called me Sparrow now. He'd known I'd have to be small and resilient and clever to survive what was coming. He'd prepared me for it without me even knowing. I still have the laptop. Diana Frost returned it to me after the trial, wiped clean except for an archived copy of all the evidence for the official record. I keep it on a shelf in my apartment, this ordinary Dell that accidentally changed everything. Sometimes I think about Austin Pembroke, the fake name Catherine used to sell it to me, about how one small mistake in digital hygiene had unraveled a 17-year cover-up. Detective Kowalski calls it fate. Rebecca Ortega calls it justice delayed, but not denied. I call it a lesson in how the truth has a way of coming out, even when everyone thinks it's safely buried. My mom and I are closer now, in a strange way. Trauma either breaks families apart or bonds them tighter, and we chose the latter. She's in therapy, processing the betrayal and the grief. I'm in therapy too, working through the weirdness of learning I'd been watched my entire childhood, of having to testify against family, of becoming a minor celebrity for solving a cold case. My therapist, Dr. Amira Hassan, says I'm handling it remarkably well, but some nights I still wake up thinking about that folder on the desktop. Sparrow_archive. My entire life, reduced to gigabytes of data. Liam thinks I should write a book about this. He's convinced it's a story people need to hear, about family corruption, about one man's long game to ensure justice, about how accidents can lead to truth. Maybe someday I will. But for now, I'm focused on school, on building a career in cybersecurity. There's an irony there I don't miss, and on figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by being watched. Catherine checks in sometimes, asks how I'm doing, offers advice on digital privacy. We have an odd relationship, the stalker and the stalked, both trying to move forward from the complicated legacy David left us. The last letter David wrote me was different from the others. It was shorter, simpler. Sparrow, it said. By the time you read this, you'll know everything. You'll know what I found, what I feared, what I tried to prevent. You'll probably be angry that I put you through this, that I arranged for you to be watched and documented and treated like a subject instead of a person. I'm sorry for that. But I couldn't protect you any other way. I couldn't let Richard get away with theft, and possibly worse. So I did what I could with the time I had. I hope you'll forgive me. I hope you'll understand that everything I did because I loved you, and I wanted you to have the truth. Be brave, little sparrow. Fly true. I keep that letter folded in my wallet. On bad days, when I'm questioning whether exposing everything was the right choice, when I'm tired of being recognized or dealing with the aftermath, I read it. It reminds me why I did this. Not for money or fame or revenge, but because David asked me to be brave and tell the truth. He'd spent his last weeks arranging an elaborate insurance policy against his own murder, and the least I could do was make sure it wasn't wasted. He'd turned his death into a weapon for justice, and I'd fired it 17 years later. Richard's in prison now, and he'll die there. The trust has been restructured under independent management. The families who were robbed have some restitution. David's name has been cleared of the paranoid reputation Richard had carefully cultivated after his death. My life has irrevocably changed, in ways I'm still processing. But when I think about that moment in my apartment at 1 a.m, staring at a folder labeled with a nickname only my family knew, I realized that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment the truth started coming out. I bought a laptop for $300 and ended up solving my uncle's murder. I found a folder with my childhood nickname and discovered I'd been protected and documented for 17 years by a private investigator following a dead man's orders. I confronted a family member who'd gotten away with killing and stealing for nearly 2 decades. And I learned that sometimes the truth is buried so deep and so carefully that it takes an accident, a mistake, a quirk of fate to bring it into the light. If you're reading this, if you've made it this far through my story, know that I'm okay. I'm better than okay. I'm free of a secret I didn't even know I was carrying. I'm building a life with the resources David wanted me to have. I'm honoring his memory by being exactly what he called me: brave, resilient, clever. A sparrow who survived the storm and learned to fly. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the truth matters. Justice matters. And sometimes, the smallest accidents can change everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.